Okay, welcome back everybody. Let's talk some more about labor economics. Okay, so um previously before the midterm we talked about monopoly, and just like you can have monopoly in product markets, we can also have monopolies in labor markets. Okay, so try to remember, what do monopolies do in product markets? All right, so you might remember they're going to do a couple things. One, they're going to restrict output. They're going to raise price above marginal cost. Sorry. And then they're going to create deadweight loss. Okay? And just like monopolies in product markets, monopolies in labor markets are going to do the same thing. So they're going to raise the wage above workers' opportunity cost. They're going to restrict the number of people who are employed, and they're going to create deadweight loss. In this case, they're going to create unemployment. Okay, and just like you can have monopoly in a labor market with collusion, monopoly in product markets with collusion, we played that collusion game. Something very similar would be a labor union. Okay, a labor union is just a cartel of workers. Okay, the idea is we're going to all agree that we want higher wages, and then if we don't get the higher wages, none of us are going to sell our labor at any wage. Okay, and you might remember that when we played the collusion game, there were people who cheated, okay, who still offered a lower price to try to steal the entire market for themselves. We'd expect the same thing in labor markets. We'd expect people to try to violate the cartel and work for a lower wage, even though the union wants to collude to get a higher wage. And that's exactly what we see. And unions really don't like these people. They call them scabs, right? So we talk about how cartels might try to shame people who violate the cartel. That's exactly what unions do. They call people who break the strike scabs, okay? But unions aren't the only monopoly in labor markets. Another example would be the American Bar Association. So you can't be a lawyer without getting permission from the Bar Association. You have to pass the bar exam. This is a form of occupational licensing. Okay, what do we expect this to do? We expect this to raise the wages of lawyers and reduce the number of lawyers who are employed. Okay, what's another one? How about the American Medical Association? Okay, so in order to be a doctor, you need a license from the AMA. What this is going to do is raise the wages that doctors receive, reduce the number of doctors, and make doctors more expensive for patients. Okay? We also talked about how cartels want to limit entry into the market. All right? What might that look like for, let's say, the AMA? Okay? So the AMA has a grant of government privilege to restrict other doctors from entering the market. But in the 90s and 2000s, right, they had a new form of competition in the form of nurse practitioners and EMTs. Okay, these were people that were providing services that could substitute for doctors, but they didn't need the license. So the AMA campaigned hard to make sure that the government placed restrictions on the ability of nurse practitioners and EMTs to practice medicine. Why? Because they want to restrict the supply of doctors in order to keep doctors' wages up. Okay, so unions, the Bar Association, the AMA, there's also occupational licensing of, in a lot of states you need an occupational license to cut hair. Okay, you need a license to open a restaurant, right? These are all forms of creating a cartel. Okay, so my wife is a social worker, right? And it's a law that you can't be a social worker without a master's degree in social work. Why would social workers support that law? Because it means that existing social workers get higher wages. Okay. Another labor market topic, so we have monopoly, where we have a limited number of sellers, right? Monopsony is the opposite. Monopsony is going to happen when you have a limited number of buyers. Okay, we don't see that in product markets too often, right? But we do see it in labor markets. Okay, so monopoly, limited number of sellers. You're going to raise the wage and restrict output. All right, monopsony, with an S, is a limited number of buyers. Okay? And let's think about what this is going to do. So remember, for a monopoly, the firm is going to have... Let's open up Paint again. Okay, so for monopoly, remember the big thing was that the firm had what? They have a downward sloping demand curve. Okay, and then they've got a marginal cost curve below it. Okay, so because this firm is the only firm in town, right, if they lower their price by a penny, not everyone is going to go shop at a different store, right? There are going to be people still willing to buy this company's product, even if they raise prices a little bit, all right? So that gives you this downward sloping demand curve. The marginal cost below it, because they can't price discriminate. Okay, and what that's going to do, that's going to raise the price of the good from that flat line to there, and it's going to restrict output from that quantity to that quantity. Okay, so that's a monopoly. Okay, what's a monopsony going to look like? Well, if a monopoly has a downward sloping demand curve, they can raise prices without losing all their customers. A monopsonist is going to have an upward sloping labor supply curve. Okay, so remember, in our perfectly competitive model, we assumed that if you offered a wage below what everyone else was paying, all of your employees would leave you, right? They would go work for somebody else, right? Here, if you're a monopsonist, if you cut wages, if you offer a wage that's below your worker's marginal product, you're still going to have people that work for you, okay? So that's the first thing. You got an upward sloping labor supply curve. All right, the second thing is, let's assume that we can't wage discriminate. We can't pay different people different wages. All right, what's that going to do? Well, that's going to mean that your marginal cost here is going to be below, above. So this is your marginal cost. This is your labor supply. Can I get rid of it? I can't. Okay, so I don't even know why I'm doing this because I have it in the PowerPoint, but I've already committed. I'm going to see it through. Okay. Labor supply. Okay. And so we're still going to produce where MC equals MR, but we're going to charge the lowest wage that we possibly can. So this is labor demand here. Should add that. So this is the demand or worker's marginal revenue product. All right, and what the monopsonist is going to do is they're going to offer a wage below that marginal revenue product. All right, so I think it can help to kind of see it drawn out step by step, which is why I tortured you with this MS Paint. But let's look at the graph. Okay, so here, remember, the firm has an upward sloping labor supply curve. Marginal cost is above supply. Here's your productivity per worker. Okay, and we're still going to produce where MC equals MR. That's our rule for profit maximization. But we're going to mark down the wage from W star to W. Okay, so remember, monopolists raise prices, restrict output. Monopsonists are going to lower prices and restrict output. Okay, so what does a monopsony in labor look like? Well, I remember when I was young, my family took a road trip and we drove through this town called Craigsville, Virginia. This is the whole town, and it's cut off. But there was a Tasty Freeze, which is it's like a fast food restaurant that sells slushies, I think. It was the only restaurant in the whole town, right? And that is what I always think of when I think of Monopsony, right? Is the Tasty Freeze in Craigsville, Virginia. So in most places, right, there are lots of different restaurants hiring. In Craigsville, there's only the Tasty Freeze. Okay, so the Tasty Freeze can offer a wage that's below your marginal product, but because there's nowhere else to work, you might still work there. Okay, but that's not the only example. How about the Catholic Church, right? So if you want to be a Catholic priest, there's only one employer for Catholic priests. All right, so remember, what are the predictions of a monopsonist? You're going to have a lower wage and a shortage of workers. Okay, and guess what? There's a huge priest shortage in the Catholic Church, probably because of monopsony. All right, the other thing in terms of policy, it's possible that if you remember for the price controls unit, we talked about how a minimum wage would create unemployment, right? Just like if unemployment is caused by wages being too high, obviously a minimum wage will cause unemployment. All right, if there's a monopsony, that might not be the case, right? So what if we set the minimum wage here? Right, well, if we set the minimum wage there, employment will actually go up. Right, and if we set the minimum wage here, employment won't change at all, right? And then if we get it too high, we'll again get unemployment. All right, so maybe if there's a monopsony, the minimum wage can create employment rather than destroy it, right? And this makes a lot of people really excited because minimum wage is a super popular policy. You might want to justify it. And there's a new paper that came out. And basically what they find is that they come up with a measurement of monopsony, basically just how many people are hiring in an area. And they found that when you increase the minimum wage in low concentration markets, so this is places with lots of employers, which are cities, so I think about 80% of people or more live in these low concentration markets. So in cities and places where a lot of people live, the minimum wage has the exact ECON 101 effect, right? So for the vast majority of people, minimum wages create unemployment. But maybe out in the boonies, where there's only a few employers, the minimum wage can actually increase employment. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, you probably shouldn't support a federal minimum wage or even a state minimum wage, right? Because it's going to decrease employment for most people. But maybe a minimum wage for rural areas could be a good thing, right? Something to think about. Okay, so please ask any questions you have about labor monopoly and labor monopsony in the comments. I'll talk about those more in another video. I didn't get any questions last week, so that's why I did the exam questions instead. But I can talk more at length about either of those. That's what my dissertation research is partially on. And I know people expressed interest in labor unions in particular at the beginning of the class. So ask questions. I'll post video talking more. I can only go so deep when I'm talking to a screen rather than to people. Okay, so let's talk about immigration. Okay, so immigration is a very contentious topic in labor econ. Well, not in labor. Something you'll see is that labor economists tend to agree on this. It's all of the weird normal people that find it contentious. Okay, so what is immigration, right? What previous topic have we covered that's the closest to immigration? So part of labor economics is just taking all of the concepts we study about product markets, monopoly, trade, externalities, all that stuff, and putting your preconceived notions about how labor markets function and instead saying, well, what if they function exactly the same as product markets? Okay, so what previous topic is the closest to immigration? All right, and it's free trade, right? It's trade, right? So you might remember economists tend to overwhelmingly support free trade, right? Because it allows people to pursue their comparative advantage. And this might come as a surprise, but economists also tend to support more immigration, or the equivalent to free trade would be open borders. Okay, let's just have people be able to move wherever they want and work wherever they want. Okay, so why, and this is a paper by Michael Clements, he's doing a literature review. So he's taking all of the estimates that people have made about the gains of immigration, and he said that if we got rid of all labor mobility barriers, if we had open borders, world GDP would double, which is a crazy conclusion. All right, if this is true, then open borders blows all other policy proposals out of the water in terms of what would do the most for humanity. Okay. So first, think about the mechanism by which this would happen. Like, how would just letting people move double world GDP? And the really simple answer to that is think of how productive you could be if I stuck you in Haiti. Okay, so you could have the smartest person in the world with a ton of skills, and if you stick them in Haiti, they're probably not able to be that productive because your productivity partially depends on the capital you have available. You need to be able to collaborate with other people, right? So if we allow people to move where their labor would be the most productive, they'd get a lot more productive, and thus the world would get a lot more productive. And is this true? Yes. So if you look at Haitians who move from Haiti to Miami and to just do kind of, work in hotels, janitor stuff, the wages of Haitians go up 10 times. Okay, so that's 1,000% increase just moving from Haiti to Miami. Okay, so it really is true that just moving can increase your productivity a lot. Okay, so if economists love open borders, why do a lot of people why do a lot of people oppose more immigration? Okay, so what's the most common argument you hear non-economists make against immigration? All right, and you've probably already said it in the accent, but it's
First,
this.
the money started going, and now everyone's getting laid off work. They took our jobs. They took our jobs.
Yeah, they took our jobs, right? Okay. The problem with this, it's the same fallacy that we saw in free trade, right? It assumes that there's just a fixed number of things that can be done, but that's obviously not true, right? Remember we talked about the example how in 1800 almost everyone was involved in agriculture, and today almost no one is. Okay, so overwhelmingly, jobs in agriculture have been destroyed, but there's not mass unemployment. People find other things to do, especially in the long run. Okay, so the idea that immigration is going to permanently reduce native employment is just kind of silly. Okay, but there is a more nuanced argument. All right, so if you think it's we can discuss it more if you don't quite understand what I'm saying. Again, go to the discussion board or the comments. Okay, but there is a more nuanced version of the they took our jobs. Before we talk about that, right? The idea that there are a limited number of jobs, if you believe that immigrants take American jobs, there's something else that could have the same effects of immigration that you should also oppose, right? And that's having children. Okay, so if you really just believe that more people are bad because there's a fixed number of jobs, you should also oppose having children. Okay, because more children equal more people equal less jobs. Okay, obviously that's not true. The population continues to go up, and income per person continues to go up. We find other things to do. Okay, but there is a more sophisticated version of that argument, and that's that immigrants lower native wages. Okay, so everyone keeps the same job, okay, or they find other jobs to do, right? But you're going to be making less money, and this at least has a basis in supply and demand. Okay, why? Well, they would say, look, you've got. Sorry, she's upset that I told her she took people's jobs. I don't know if you can hear my daughter, but she's a little fussy. Okay, so immigration opponents, they'll say, look, it's supply and demand. Okay, right? You got labor demand. And then you've got labor supply. All right, here's your equilibrium wage. Okay, immigrants, they increase labor supply. You can't deny that more people increases labor supply. All right, what's that going to do? That's going to increase employment. All right, they're not going to take any jobs, but it's going to lower wages. Okay, so they say if you don't acknowledge that immigrants lower wages, you don't understand Econ 101. It's simple supply and demand. Okay, so think about this. Why might this not be the case? Okay, so just evaluate. Think about it. Why might it be? Why might just a simple increase in supply not capture the full effects of what immigration does? And the answer is that immigration also increases labor demand. Okay? Why? Well, there are a few reasons. Okay? The first one is that immigrants aren't just producers, they're also consumers. Okay, so it's true that more immigrants means that there are more waiters in the market for waiters, but there are also more consumers in the market for food outside of the home, so that's going to boost the demand for waiters, which is going to raise their wages. So that's the first kind of simple one. The other one is a little bit more nuanced, but immigrants can actually be complements to other careers, okay, through comparative advantage. Okay, so we talked about how even if you have someone who's worse at everything than you, it still is a good idea to have them around because that means you can spend more time on the things that you are best at, your comparative advantage. All right, so think about you've got a surgeon, right, and he has to mow his own lawn, right? If there are a bunch of immigrants who mow lawns for cheap, then guess what? They are helping the surgeon save lives. All right, we don't think about it that way, but it's true, right? The immigrant who's mowing the surgeon's lawn is giving the surgeon more time to save lives. So the lawn mowing immigrant is actually shifting out labor demand for surgeons because he's making surgeons more productive. Okay, so those are some reasons why it's not cut and dry why more immigrants would automatically lead to decreased wages. Okay, so it may be the case, right? It may be that labor supply shifts a lot, and for some people, labor demand only shifts a little bit. Okay, but it's not obvious. Okay, we have to look at the world. We have to look at the data. Okay, so if you remember last week, we talked about the Mariel boat lift and how that's a great way to look at the effects of immigration on wages. In that study, David Card found that basically there was no change in wages, that the effect was so small that you can't really pick it up in statistics, which means that labor supply and labor demand are moving about the same amount. Okay? Here are a few estimates, right? So the long-run impact of immigration on native wages, these are two different studies. So for this one, it's mostly zero. For Borhaus's study, the biggest effect was that high school dropouts see their wages drop by 4%. Okay. Other people see positive impacts, and all U.S.-born employees see just no effect. So total wages, nothing. High school dropouts maybe see their wages fall a little bit. Okay, why high school dropouts? Well, they're probably the people who compete most directly with immigrants. But those are counterbalanced by the fact that some people see their wages go up, right? Because they're able to, have cheaper childcare, spend more time at work, stuff like that. Okay, so in general, economists think that the effect of immigration on native wages is very small, if not zero. Okay, it might be negative for certain subpopulations like high school dropouts, but in the aggregate, it's basically zero. All right. Even if the sign is negative, though, this was a test question, right? That doesn't mean that this is inefficient, right? That's a pecuniary externality. So even if wages go down a lot, total welfare still rises. Why? Because bosses are better off. Okay, so then, so it may be the fact that, immigrants come in and lower wages. So the immigrants are better off, the natives are worse off, but the bosses are also better off by a little bit because now they have, they can either lower prices to pass that on to consumers, and if they're in competition, they probably will, or they can just benefit directly themselves. But that's a pecuniary externality. All right. Here's some more ones. These are just a bunch of different studies. This is just for high school dropouts, for low-skilled workers, the more recent studies. So in general, they've gotten smaller but a little bit more consistent. So, these all agree that it's about a % decrease. These all find 0. Okay, so in general, there's probably some small effect for high school dropouts. Everybody else, either 0 effect or a slight positive effect. Okay, so we already answered those questions. All right, so let's get into some more nuanced examples. So they say, okay, immigrants boost economic growth. They don't really hurt native wages. They don't take our jobs, but they have negative externalities. Okay, what negative externalities could immigrants have? Well, maybe some people say, well, immigrants are more likely to commit crime than native people. Therefore, they have a negative externality and we need to tax them, right? That doesn't seem to be the case in reality. Places with more immigrants don't seem to have more crime. This is an empirical paper showing that the Immigration Crime Association is actually negative. So places with more immigrants actually have less crime. But it's very weak, which means it's probably 0. Let's listen to Milton Friedman talk about the issue.
Suppose you go around and ask people. The United States, as you know, before 1914 had completely free immigration. Anybody could get on a boat and come to these shores, and if he landed on Ellis Island, he was an immigrant. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? You will find hardly a soul who will say it was a bad thing. Almost everybody will say it was a good thing. But then I suppose I say to the same people, but now what about today? Do you think we should have free immigration? Oh no, they'll say, we couldn't possibly have free immigration today. Why, that would flood us with immigrants from India and God knows where. We'd be driven down to a bare subsistence level. What's the difference? How can people be so inconsistent? Why is it that free immigration was a good thing before 1914 and free immigration is a bad thing today? Well, there's a sense in which that answer is right. There's a sense in which free immigration, in the same sense as we had it before 1914, is not possible today. Why not? Because it is one thing to have free immigration to jobs. It is another thing to have free immigration to welfare. And you cannot have both.
Okay, so this is a very popular argument so we were talking about ways in which immigrants might have negative externalities. There's the crime one. We've seen that's mostly bunk. Immigrants actually commit less crime than natives. This is another one where immigrants are a fiscal drain. Okay, so if you have open borders and a welfare state, immigrants are going to come in and just collect our welfare and not be productive, and that's going to be a net harm. Again, the problem with this is that immigrants actually use welfare less than natives. All right, why? Well, people usually think that our welfare is designed to help the poor, but in reality, our welfare system is much more specifically targeted at 3 groups of individuals that aren't the poor, right? The young, or sorry, not the young, the old, the sick, and the female, right? So older people, unhealthy people, and women are overwhelmingly more likely than other groups of individuals to collect welfare benefits. And if you think about the stereotypical immigrant, especially undocumented immigrants, they tend to be young, they tend to be healthy because they're here to work, and they tend to be men. And all of these things mean that immigrants collect fewer welfare benefits than natives. Okay, so Milton Friedman was actually kind of wrong on this. All right, one of the few things he's wrong on, because I'm a big fan of Milton Friedman. The thing is, even if they were likely to be a greater drain on their welfare system, is that necessarily an argument against open borders? Okay, there's a way where we can have all of the gains from open borders and we don't have to worry about the negative fiscal effects of immigration. And that is Alex Narasta, an immigration researcher, is fond of saying, if you're worried about that, you should build a wall around the welfare system and not a wall around the country. Okay, so You just say immigrants can't collect welfare, but you can still come here and work. Okay? That would have, you would get all of the benefits of open borders, and if you're worried about this welfare thing, even though you probably shouldn't be based on the data, that addresses it. Would that decrease the benefits of open borders? Probably not, right? If I was stuck in Haiti and I had the option to move to the United States, conditional on the fact that I can't collect welfare, I think I would take that deal, and I think most people would too. And this idea that we can address any concerns about immigration in other ways besides restricting it, I think is really important. So some people are concerned that immigrants might, they're productive workers, but they might vote for inefficient policies. Okay. Again, that actually doesn't seem to be the case in the data. Immigrants tend to have similar political preferences to Native Americans. When I say Native Americans, I mean people born in the United States, not American Indians, that kind of thing. What was I saying? Politics. If you're concerned about immigrants coming and voting poorly, though, there are ways where you can get the enormous benefits from immigration and still be able to have your concerns about them voting poorly assuaged. And that's just simply say you can come to the country, but you can't vote. All right? Is that unreasonable? Maybe, but again, if you were stuck in Haiti, I think all of us would say you can move to the United States, but you can't vote. All of us would take that deal, right? So when thinking about arguments against immigration, which there are a lot, maybe you have some that you'd like to discuss. If you think you have a really strong argument against immigration, and there are good ones, just like there are good arguments against free trade sometimes. Post in the comments, we'll talk about them. But consider these two. So one is the harm large enough to outweigh the enormous potential gains. So remember, we're estimating a doubling of world GDP, which is trillions and trillions of dollars, right? And the second thing is there a way to address this concern without restricting immigration, or is preventing people from entering the country the only way? So one good argument against immigration is maybe we should prevent people with infectious diseases from entering the country, right? So you'll see economists, when Trump did his travel ban in like 2017, economists tended to not like it, right? Because economists tend to support immigration more than the average American. But economists during this recent pandemic have spoken in support of travel bans. Okay, so maybe in a specific case, the harm from people infected with COVID-19 coming into the country is larger than the gains from immigration for a month, and we can't really prevent that from happening without restricting immigration. Okay, so that's it for these slides. I would look forward to seeing the discussion continue on Blackboard and in the comments of this video, wherever it's more convenient for you. And then hopefully I get some questions that we can talk about some more in another video. So I will talk to you guys soon. I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy.